Welcome back to the entertainment room. I have here another round of quick movie reviews a random guy saw last week who just wants to unload all of his ramblings onto any consenting listener. A weird guy who is now in his truck in an open field on his lunch break talking to a microphone about movies. Anyway, I've done these before and I still want to do an episode like this most weeks. This episode will be incredibly Christmas heavy, with us officially being in that season now. Not only Christmas themed movies, but also Christmas horror movies. Our lineup today is 2023's It's a Wonderful Knife, 2017's Anna and the Apocalypse, 2018's Await Further Instructions, 2007's P2, 2021's Red Snow, 2021's Silent Night, and 1997's Jack Frost. Holy fuck, that was exhausting. But if you're new here, I will do a non-spoiler section for every film first, then I will launch into a spoiler section if there's anything I want to delve into further. And in most cases, I will. So let's jump right in. So 2023's It's a Wonderful Knife follows Winnie, who defeats a serial killer, but after a loss, she feels far from heroic and she winds up wishing she was never born, which puts her in a parallel universe where she is not known by anyone and the killer is still alive and with a much higher body count. Now I love the premise for this one, alternate realities, parallel universes, an immensely enthralling concept. As far as casting, I didn't recognize too many people. Of course there was Joel McHale and Justin Long. Justin Long is always an interesting addition to most horror films he's been in, and this one is no different. There's an actress in this movie who I don't know by name, but I knew I recognized her face. Her name is Catherine Isabelle, who plays Aunt Gail, and it turns out she played Ginger in that early 2000s werewolf film Ginger Snaps, which I was quite fond of, so that was cool to see her years later again. She's likely been in other things too, but that was the most recognizable role for me. And with this movie, it is a slasher, of course, but it's also a dark comedy. With those slasher elements, this is a bloody film. Most of the kills are nothing unique, but it is somewhat graphic in places. And with the comedy aspect, I think just some of the scenes and interactions are meant to be slightly amusing, but I wouldn't go into this expecting any laughs, if any, if that's what you want. That didn't really bother me, I was just hoping for a decent film. So I do feel this one lacks suspense for the most part. I never really felt on edge throughout. Most of the characters honestly aren't even that particularly likable, plus the scares are often predictable. And with the acting, I won't personally say it's often bad, or maybe it kind of is. But it feels very much like a Lifetime channel horror thriller. The acting can be a bit soap opera-ish, or simply a little over the top and theatrical, so I didn't always buy into different emotions like I wanted to. And also the relationships and characterization, that aspect felt maybe a bit rushed with most characters. One relationship I kind of bought into overall, but mostly they just felt rushed to get to the next exciting scene. And I mean exciting in theory. So It's a Wonderful Knife is a fine Christmas slasher. I won't say it's not worth the watch. It does keep the pace moving along pretty well and it offers mild entertainment. If you're in need of a different Christmas horror film for your watch list, it's not the worst option. 5.7 out of 10. The next film on this list is Anna and the Apocalypse. With my quick review that I did for this movie on TikTok, I knew that I either can't fucking read or I have a concerning lack of observation skills because I didn't realize going into this that it was a musical, and it says it right on the goddamn cover. So, yeah, that was an unpleasant surprise. That really should not have been a surprise. But before I get into that, the plot. Anna and her friends are caught in the middle of a zombie outbreak, and they have to fight to survive. So this is a horror comedy as well, but to start with the musical genre aspect, there are about 8 musical numbers in this movie, and to be completely honest, the singing, the lyrics, none of it was bad. The cast has talent, I'm just not naturally into most musicals. It's just a personal preference, but when it comes to horror, I feel like it dampens the tension a good bit. I think the reason I feel this movie is a partial missed opportunity is because I actually enjoyed several characters. The Scottish cast here Had a lot of dry humor and some witty dialogue that largely worked for me. And I wanted so much more of that. So when the musical stuff started back up in between all of this, it was rarely a fun transition for me. Never a fun transition for me. And those moments just kind of took me out of the story and the relationships these characters were building. As far as the horror elements go, it's nothing crazy, but the action is fine. Some gory kills and fight scenes that keep things moving, kept things fun, and there are some societal themes, which I will get into briefly in the spoilers section. They aren't anything new, but they worked mostly with the story. Aside from the fun character moments and action, I do feel nothing new was really done with the zombie subgenre. The musical filler feels like it tries to hide the lack of substance in the story, and I guess mixing the two genres was interesting, but the idea itself is about as compelling as it gets. It almost feels like putting some Christmas lights on a dusty rock you found in your backyard to make it look semi-presentable. That may be a tad harsh, but despite my complaints, I enjoyed it and was entertained by it. It's worth a one-time watch, but I don't see it standing out down the road. This was a 2017 movie, and I just randomly heard about it recently this year. 6.5 out of 10. The next film is Await Further Instructions. It follows a family trapped inside their home on Christmas by an unknown force, and they are getting strange instructions from the TV. The premise is clearly stellar, with a lot of fun that can be had. There is tension already with this family, so that kind of made the forced obligatory conversations especially interesting. The story is reasonably creepy and unsettling, which is great, but it has a message to tell, and while visually it is appealing most of the time, you may likely kind of get the point before too long as far as what it is trying to communicate, or rather what it is trying to thrust into your face and slap you around with. And again, that stuff I'll go into in spoilers. So is this film scary? No, not particularly. No jump scares or anything, definitely more of a sci-fi and psychological thriller. The messages were brilliantly ominous in their wording on the TV, and when it comes to the characters, only two are really likable. Another's, I guess, half likable, and I think this is done on purpose, of course, and it is a ballsy move. I often prefer some additional characters I can relate to help me care, but as far as how it all fits into the story, I actually think the tactic worked pretty well. The mystery itself was what kept me invested. And a few characters, one in particular, I feel like the transition is rather quick, in my opinion, as far as their psyche and decision making. Someone with a deeper psychology background might be thrilled to debate me, in that, as stability was not a strong suit of this household by any means. But yeah, some things kind of took me out of it sometimes, but not too much. The movie is rated rather low, at about a 4.9 out of 10 on IMDb, and is mostly due to the fact it seems because it's a bit superficial while dragging out the runtime to 90 minutes, but I think it personally should have been a little higher at least. It's flawed, absolutely. But the story and the pacing is captivating enough to warrant at least some more respect. I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10. The next film is P2. Taking place on Christmas Eve, a workaholic named Angela leaves her job late to try and go to a family's Christmas celebration, but becomes trapped. The parking garage, the building, everything is locked, and a man with sinister intentions has an unhinged evening planned for them. So not only are you playing cat and mouse with a creep, you're also locked inside your job on a holiday. Something I will say for now that's vague. Angela, our lead, could not catch a fucking break before this guy came around, so this was just the cherry on top. And this was a second viewing, but I saw this one years ago and I couldn't remember really anything about it, so it was like my first time again. Isn't that special? But I rated it decently in the past, but I didn't remember it being anything extravagant. But after watching it again, is it groundbreaking? No, absolutely not. Does it do well with its simple premise? I say it does. And the killer named Tom is played by Wes Bradley, who is phenomenal at playing creepy, sad boy stalkers apparently. And this guy, with his unpredictability and his cold stares, he was a great choice. Angela, played by Rachel Nichols, does a fantastic job also. Just a range of emotions are required by her character, and she appears effortless in portraying them, so I really bought into her. Decision making in these types of films, depending on how appalling, can make or break them. In the case of P2, I feel there are any glaring mistakes made by our protagonist. Sure, she makes mistakes and some wrong judgments, but I think you can realistically attribute those to rush decisions in the heat of the moment with extreme stress and anxiety, and I often can't make a simple decision with no pressure other than the unnecessary pressure I place on myself, so I can see myself and many people making some of these same errors. But I feel in most cases, everything felt mostly realistic with how it extended the runtime and kept this twisted adventure going. Pichu is not jump scare heavy, but the couple it has are pretty decent. There's an unsettling one involving a phone light. I kinda saw it coming, but the frame was still really haunting anyway. But Pichu is a solid thriller that will keep you invested. It's an easy choice if you want something festive but also spooky this holiday season. I can see myself watching it again in a few years. 7 out of 10. Next film is a little vampire flick I saw discussed a couple times on TikTok that piqued my interest, and that is 2021's Red Snow. Following a desperate vampire romance novelist whose family home is infiltrated by actual vampires. Now, I haven't heard of this one until recently, and just glancing at the description and a couple stills, it was obvious this would be a low budget film, which is totally fine. You don't need $300 million to make an entertaining and satisfactory story. I was curious what avenue this film would take. How gory would it be? Would it lean more into comedy or horror or a fair mix? And without spoiling much here, I would say it leans more into the comedy aspect more so. It does have its horror elements and a few moments of action, but an incredibly limited budget that shows in these scenes. And that was okay because what you do get here is a film with some over the top but occasionally witty characters who play off each other rather well. It's not unknown who the true villains and threats are part of the time, so that will add some mystery to the mix. The acting's a bit shoddy, not bad, but not top tier either. But I was invested in the dialogue and the dynamic, the chemistry between some of the characters, and I think that component being decently effective is what helped this movie not be, well, bad. The creators knew what they were working with and even added some fun surprises and twists along the way that made the hour and 20 minutes fly by. I don't want to say much else here, but if you want a more cozy winter feel with a more isolated setting, I'd recommend this easy watch. It won't blow you away, but it will give you something a little different in the vampire subgenre. 6.6 out of 10. Silent Night from 2021 is the next film, and it follows a family who is casually, not so casually, getting ready to celebrate Christmas. Their last Christmas, not just theirs, everybody's last Christmas, because the world is ending. How will they spend their final moments? What is going on? Are they really prepared to accept death? Is there a conspiracy? Why is there always an unusually horny relative? This is a dark comedy for sure. I don't even know if I would necessarily count this as a horror film. Some aspects technically work, I guess, but I would hesitate to go there. I'll try and stay especially light in this section as the premise is really interesting and you could explore many avenues with it. But the question is, how well does it explore it? Well, for starters, I enjoy this cast overall. Keira Knightley, Matthew Good, Lily Rose Depp, Lucy Punch. All these are recognizable faces off the bat, but notice how I said I enjoyed the cast, the actors, and not necessarily the characters. Having largely unlikable characters, once again I gotta get into this, is a tough move. It can and has worked, but when you aren't given much to latch onto, and motivations are unclear, it's hard to get fully invested in the story, and some decisions are made that don't make much sense in this movie. And some characters are treated more poorly than others, and it's not fully expanded on as to why. Plus the inevitable conversations that come about grief and death, which is a pretty large component to making this movie work, they're rarely interesting. It just kind of feels like a jumble of side conversations that have little impact, if any. Humor could have saved some of this, and I did aggressively expel an extra breath of air here and there, but the dynamics with this family weren't enthralling enough to make me care. And there are just some moments where I felt like an outcast family member here. He was just waiting for the most comfortable opportunity to leave this so-called bonding session and go up to the guest room and stay inside and dissociate the rest of the night. And I know I have been completely negative so far, but believe it or not, I'm not saying this movie is bad. It's not. It has some character moments and philosophy about life that kind of drew me in. So that was good, but it stays fairly surface level. And again, I've found some exchanges amusing every so often. And as you might expect with people awaiting their impending doom for a while, they pretty casually discuss doing and saying things they might not do or say if the world kept going as it previously was. Not only my initial notes there, really, I do think it's worth a watch, which may be surprising to hear me say by this point. It's a fine holiday apocalyptic dark comedy that will provide you with something different. It entertains mostly despite its flaws. I quite enjoyed the ending actually, which I will again discuss in spoilers. So for now, I'll leave my rating 5.8 out of 10. Last film before the spoilers section is, well, not the best for last necessarily, and that is 1997's Jack Frost. 1 year before Michael Keaton's Kids film, we had a man named Jack Frost who, on his transport to get executed because he's a serial killer, gets into a wreck and his genetics mix with the snow, and he now lives as a killer snowman. This is kind of a cult classic that has entertained many for years now. I typically like films like this, at least somewhat. Even if they suck, I'm always excited to try them and see what kind of fun they had with it, how they handled their opportunity. So Jack Frost wreaks havoc on a small town in a pretty elusive disguise. Sam is the lead as the town sheriff, and you must find a way to defeat the threat. And with a movie like this, you can expect scares, good story, good acting. You can just hope to have a good time. And with Jack Frost, a film that takes an iconic childhood character and makes them terrifying and traumatic, or traumatic, not so much terrifying. This is not my favorite of that group, but does have some fun. Special effects are lacking, obviously, but the practical effects of some of the kills were interesting, and I won't spoil any in this section. You also get a deadly drinking game you could play, where you take a drink whenever Jack Frost uses an ice, freeze, or snow pun, which is funny because that's the only language he ends up speaking in. The only other one to do it so excessively is Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze in Batman and Robin, another 1997 shit pile of a movie. But like many of these films, just the in-between stuff doesn't hardly hit at all. I expect bad acting, but it'd be nice if they would try a little harder with the jokes, or even some of the antics of the other characters. Now, of course, those antics and jokes, the dialogue, they can be completely stupid, of course. Just add some personality, make them fun. It will help us care more as well. And this film hardly gives us that entertainment value. A little bit of those Christmas vibes, but that's about it. Some people really enjoy this film, and I get it. And again, I do like some of the kills for what they are. Just by the third act finale, I was just kind of waiting for it to end. It for some reason felt longer than a ridiculous conclusion should have. And it's possible I'm nitpicking a little bit at this point. I don't mean to. I just found this one okay. It was a lukewarm time, but I don't see myself rewatching this one each year or anything. Maybe one more time down the road. We'll see. 3.5 out of 10. Alright, so moving on to spoilers. If you haven't seen some of these films and want to, I will go into some specifics with each, so go watch them and come back if you're curious about my thoughts. Otherwise, let's jump back in. Jumping back into It's a Wonderful Knife, once again, Winnie is in an alternate reality where she didn't previously exist, and a serial killer is slicing and dicing citizens because she wasn't there to stop it. And it's hard to know where to start with this section, but I may start with Justin Long as the douchey mayor. This man rarely plays anybody likable in a horror film. I guess his character was technically likable in the first Jeepers Creepers, but that's about it. And he is also the killer here, revealed to us within the first 10 minutes or so when Winnie kills him. And I actually watched about 5 minutes of this movie before having to pause it and go do something else before coming back and finishing it. And I was just racking my brain for fun, and I was like, nah, the shitty asshole mayor being the killer seems too obvious. I wonder if it's nice guy Joel McHale as Winnie's dad, and Mayor Henry Waters' employee. And it turns out I was kind of still right in the end, with McHale's character David being responsible for most of the body count in the parallel universe. So that was an interesting turn of events. But anyway, I like the transition that Winnie was the one who took down the killer, but felt no real glory for it in the future. A year later, and she's still seemingly depressed because her friend was killed before she could save her. Plus, you know, the whole thing with her actually having had killed somebody. And I don't know if it was the acting or what, but I just did not buy into most characters. I think many were intentionally goofy, but with Winnie, I'm not saying the actress did a bad job, it's just, again, it feels very Lifetime-ish, kind of like a dark Hallmark film, especially at the very end with all the giddiness of Winnie, but the rushed characterization just didn't draw me into the story as much as I had hoped. Plus, even her parents who rushed her to cope with her friend's death, and the fact that she killed somebody, it just kind of made me feel less for them as well, as they never let her talk it out, or probably even discuss therapy over it. Plus that unfair gift exchange at their Christmas celebration of an ugly-ass pink tracksuit versus a new truck for her brother. Trauma or no trauma, I'm causing a scene. But anyway, I did actually like the Bernie character who was played by Jess McLeod, the weird kid they all rudely and uncreatively called Weirdo. Not unlike the weird outcast character in the movie who clearly means well and just kind of does their own thing. It brings some extra personality to the table, plus I believed in the chemistry between her and Winnie. It was the one relationship that I feel like was the closest to being fleshed out. And it was heartbreaking to hear about her plan to end her own life after the last Christmas, and Winnie helped convince her that she's not alone. Mind you, the writing of the dialogue and the delivery was lacking, to say the least, but I like Bernie. The slasher elements again were passable and fairly quick in pace, but there was nothing that stood out. There are stupid ass character moments. Some moments are way overcomplicated by the characters as far as escaping their attacker. Most hilariously, they knock down the killer down a flight of stairs, and he is passed out, supposedly, and they have to step over him to get to the front door to escape. Now, the knife is nearby, but not in his hand. There were 3 or 4 people against him at this point, and 2 or 3 stepped over him before Winnie, and neither of them thought to grab the fucking knife. It was Winnie who eventually does so, but for some reason straddles him first, and remains unarmed for another few seconds before actually grabbing it. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. It did work out in the end, but we went on a journey for no reason. But yeah, in this reality that exists because the mayor's vengeful spirit created this world, it made more sense that the citizens were in this trance and nobody was solving the murders, and then the ending was fine. Henry Waters, is killed, and when he wishes herself back, she makes amends with her parents and goes to see Bernie, and they all lived happily ever after in what is now a Hallmark world, I am sure. It's a Wonderful Knife. Pass the time. Next film. Back to our zombie musical, Anna and the Apocalypse. Again, the characters were largely entertaining and even funny in places. I enjoyed most of the conversations between them. I missed them instantly once the singing started. And I feel there was more to care about with some of them. I enjoyed the friendship between Anna and John. He was friend zoned and all that, but he remained supportive of her through the end. And his death actually made me kind of sad. I fully expected him to make it to the end. Kudos for unpredictability, I guess, but that kind of sucked. And that didn't bother me in and of itself, but I was pissed off when he went out and the school douchebag, Nick, seemed to be scoring points with Anna and lived through the end. And they don't confirm a romantic relationship, but there was just too much of that tension, and it kind of irritated me. And of course, they try to humanize him more with some sob story about his family, and I get it. I just don't think they gave us nearly enough for me to be cool with him making it out. He got better slightly, but I just don't know. It's very possible I'm just being petty. But when it comes to the humor overall, one of my favorite scenes may be when they try to sneak out of the building with just an inflatable pool covering the top 25% of their bodies, which I never would have written down for a zombie film. And that was their unique camouflage. But I was laughing all through this scene, them instantly regretting the plan and quietly arguing about it. They stop and sit down for some reason, and this elderly woman zombie gets tired and sits down on one of the characters' heads and proceeds to pee on the pool. It's just so dumb, but the delivery, the facial expressions of the characters worked surprising wonders in this scene as well as some other simple ones. And the kills were your typical zombie melee kills with numerous sharp objects, blunt objects. And these kids took the whole zombie and killing thing surprisingly well quickly, but I'm not going to tackle that much as this is a dark comedy, but the scenes are fun enough to help curb that craving if you want a zombie flick. Then the societal themes I mentioned earlier were more of the same, with government corruption, help not coming. In this case, one of the aspects was the military becoming zombies very quickly, and there was also technological themes, social media plays a role, and there was quickly a hashtag going around where people would stop to take selfies with the zombies, but instead of continuing to run, and that was kind of funny with our society's obsession with recording everything and making everything a trend. And now it's not new, but it got a chuckle out of me. And there was another scene where a character was sneaking to get a key from an office. She had to sneak past a large group of zombies in the same room, but thankfully they were distracted by something playing on the TV, giving the term zombie a double meaning. That one was especially on the nose, but it did not bother me either. But the ending is pretty normal with them getting keys to a car and driving off, with no known end to all of this. It's very standard. It kind of felt like they just wanted to end it. So I do like aspects of this film, but it was disappointing how unoriginal the story was and how it plays out. Between that and the musical aspect, there just wasn't too much tension either. So overall, some missed opportunities, but a fine time worth experiencing once. Back to the film Await Further Instructions, which again followed the family trapped in their home with edgy TV messages from an unknown source. And with spoilers, the first thing I want to touch on was the clear racial tension, the racial undertones early on. The entire family is white, except for Anji, Nick's girlfriend, and while Nick's mom tries to be welcoming and supportive, the rest of the family clearly is not having it, especially his sister Kate, who is the personification of an entitled sorority brat with far too much ego and praise. And despite the disrespect Anji gets, they really take it to heart when she stands up for herself, which she does pretty often. It really just drives home that anger and disgust you have for this family as a whole, and I was really concerned with the direction of this movie when shit started to go down because almost everyone was terrible. But again, I came around to the format, especially since the ominous mystery of the situation and the household implosions of its members made for a thrilling popcorn drama to watch. And the themes again are pretty easy to pick up on. Blindly following authority comes with some pros and senses of safety, but the cons far outweigh the pros in the same sense. There are also definitely religious undertones, once again, with authority, and worshipping something in the hopes that rewards and peace will come with it, and visually with the TV and whatever the black tentacle-like objects were. The third act was respectable and even disturbing, especially when the being physically picked up the dad's corpse and tried to maneuver it to do what it wanted. And it did ride a thin line between creepy and comical, but I'll just take it for what it is. And then the messages, having been explored multiple times, I don't think the mental payoff is quite there, but I enjoy the premise. And also the emotion of hate is clearly taught. You can grow out of it, but people often don't. And after the death of the asshole entitled grandfather, who basically called everyone a pussy his entire retirement, there was some nice line delivery from the dad, who recited how little his dad made him feel his entire life. You know, he avoided going to the bathroom in the middle of the night when he was a kid, so he wouldn't have to wake him and anger him. And then one night when he was 8, he went to bed because of this, and to this day, until he died, he called him some weird, mean-spirited name that I can't remember right now, but he called him this as a grown man. He called him that from age 8 to whatever age he is now. Granted, no positive arc came out of this, but if you think about it, it often doesn't, realistically. And speaking of the dad in this movie, I may change my mind down the road if I remember this movie, but I do feel his arc, where he completely snaps, came maybe a little quick, abandoning his injured pregnant daughter in a crisis to go to his study and hide, then trying to kill Anji and then just fighting everybody else who stood in his way. He obviously was not stable before, but just some of the moments I didn't fully buy into. This is honestly a small complaint though, and after talking out the last part about his dad, I may retract that in the future with some more reflection, but right now, I found it still a bit unnatural. But overall, the TV messages were unsettling, and how quickly most of this family would obey them. There were some gorier moments than I expected. Nothing too over the top, but they came at intervals that still kept you on your toes, and didn't feel simply indulgent. 3 of Scott's fingers, for instance, are sliced off when trying to reach through a slot in the door, and that was a standout opener to that avenue. And I wouldn't watch this movie again, I don't think. And while I get the point, as far as satisfaction with the characters and the story, I think it leaves a lot to be desired. But it is one I'm happy I watched, so that's all I have to say for that film. Back to our little cat and mouse parking garage thriller, P2. So after having to stay late Christmas Eve, having to face a past almost rapist who works in the same building as her, who just gave her a half-hearted apology, Angela now has to deal with a creepy security guard who has a warped idea of a romantic gesture, to say the absolute fucking least. And while he wasn't a villain in this other film, I knew Wes Bradley, who plays Tom, was capable of a role like this after watching American Beauty. Again, he wasn't a villain in American Beauty, but he was quite a creepy guy, with a fascination for bizarre shit. Here we get a home-cooked meal with his date, who he dressed himself, in a low-cut dress of course, and cold, harsh stares when he hears something he doesn't like. I think the best thing about this thriller, and most like it, is the realism in the stalkerish killer. And it's hard to tell if Tom in this movie genuinely believes he's being romantic by all these unhinged gestures, including, of course, ramming her would-be rapist Jim with his car a few times until he spills his intestines, or if he is just explaining it to her in a way to simply fuck with her head. And a more sane person might say the latter, but with all the creepy ass men out there with a lot of issues, I'm not fully convinced. And this thriller is light on jump scares. The few it has are hit or miss. I like the car trunk being thrown open in the very beginning. The moment I hinted at earlier with the phone light revealing Tom right behind Angela in the pitch black parking garage was a little predictable in its setup, but it was still a haunting shot. I think the most effective aspect was the unknown of what Tom would do next. Angela pushed it numerous times trying to escape, to which I can't say I blame her, as staying completely calm with him all night could have led to something much worse than uncomfortable dinner conversation. And I feel you get the sense Tom doesn't always know what Tom is going to do next, or when he will unleash his Rottweiler Rocky. God, poor dog. Just wanted to help his owner out, having no idea how fucked in the head he is. Rocky deserved better. So did Angela, too, obviously, who had to kill him. And you could argue also more logical fallacies than I am about to name. There's a probable environmental one, where Angela would likely get hypothermia after running around in only a dress and also soaking wet for almost half the film. And then another might be that Jim had a whole family and everything, and no one seemed to call in that he was missing for so long. No one came to check on him. And we don't know what he told his wife or whatever, so maybe a bit of a nitpick, but otherwise, there were no errors that truly bothered me for just a simple little thriller. But Tom's death by car explosion was pretty satisfying, honestly, especially after his typical sociopathic male outburst calling her a fucking cunt, after professing his supposed love for her all movie. She ultimately outsmarted him, and with all that build-up and failures of hers to try and get away, it was a fulfilling ending with how it was carried out. A simple thriller with sufficient entertainment value. It's worth your time, I think. Next film. Back to our low-budget vampire film, Olivia as our lead, the struggling vampire romance author. She's a bit cheesy and awkward, of course, but I mean, that's her character. Would somebody honestly harbor a vampire in their garage, knowing the risk? In this day and age of vampires being sexualized as often as they are, I can't really say, but artists will sometimes go through great lengths for motivation, so I didn't think her hiding vampire Luke sounded too far-fetched. And speaking of vampires being sexualized, with her being a vampire romance novelist, I was curious where the overall vibe would fall. Would it be more Twilight, Vampire Diaries, True Blood, or would it be like the traditional vampire tropes, or would it fall somewhere in the middle? And I was pleased that it fell somewhere in the middle. She clearly has an attraction to Luke, and even fantasizes about him one night. They have chemistry. The conversations, despite the uncertainty of Luke's intentions at first, were my favorite aspect of this movie. Their banter and their jokes, Luke's dry delivery of his humor surrounding vampires and the myths and facts of their lore. And I also like that they casted that doubt. Olivia fell between this battle of this vampire hunting group called Savron versus the vampires. And was Luke as dangerous as this Julius King guy said, or are vampires more misunderstood than expected? As far as the horror aspects, nothing was really scary. That third act battle between Olivia and the three main vampires, including Luke, was a decent low-budget quick battle. The opening scene was the only thing that I feel was absolutely fucking horrendous. A woman is baited out of her house to three baby blue-eyed vampires surrounding her before we get the opening title. And it's just the most bland opener they could have used. No unique touches of tension or even comedy. And in the age of thousands of movies and numerous streaming services, I can see many people turning this off after that opener. But thankfully I'm one of those who is a little more stubborn than that. And the little twist they add at the end, I actually did not see coming. Olivia gets a little more morbid than I expected. She ultimately doesn't forgive Luke completely for lying to her and nearly reverting back to his old ways. She's unsure she can trust him again, but her career has taken off and she wants to keep him for more ideas and motivation, so tie his ass up, drape some garlic around him, and ration more pig's blood, and she has a supernatural slave. And I kind of liked that they didn't go the typical route where, they fall in love, they start a family there, stuff like that. That kind of ending has its place, but I was kind of happy they took a different, darker route. It also leaves the Olivia character off on an unsettling note. She already seems strange, to say the least, for harboring a vampire in her garage, to help with her writing, and even helped accidentally kill a man in the process. But now she has a taste of success, she now has a prisoner, and there's no telling what else she'll do to hold on to that success. I like that. Solid, to the point thriller. Next film. Back to Silent Night from 2021, about a family celebrating Christmas while simultaneously awaiting their impending doom. The world is ending, but Christmas first. So again, with the characters, I enjoy the setup, the casual jokes about letting your kids cuss, because fuck it. They forgot some important dessert, so of course they just, grab a mallet, break into the boarded up shop up the road. Who gives a shit? And I was quickly concerned, though, when I realized this family pretty much just sucks. Even the ones who don't seem completely brain dead are a bit annoying. And I know this is at least largely intentional in a way, I would assume, but it made any conversations and the eventual acceptance, the emotional aspects, much less impactful, and it just started to feel more drawn out. And Sophie, portrayed by Lily Rose Depp, was the outcast pretty much, but aside from her trying to help the kids come to terms with what was happening, which was only really explained to them accidentally by TV viewings in the past, I don't really see why this family was so against her. I was trying to listen in, but I wasn't really getting the big picture unless I missed something. But maybe it's just she was the only one who would tell it like it is, and the shallow people around her don't like that. I mean, I don't know. I'll go with that. But the kid, Art, questions everything and wonders if this poisonous gas will actually kill them. Is there any confirmation that it itself has killed anybody? Well, we would assume so because the government said it has. And then there's that conspiracy I was kind of hoping for with this kind of plot. I like the inclusion of the exit pill that you can take whenever you're ready to avoid the supposedly harmful gas that will kill you all the same, but much slower and with more pain. And Art sounds like just a kid with how he argues his points about not taking the pill, which is likely a big reason why people didn't often take him seriously, but he did seem to have a point. And turns out he was right, as he succumbed to the gas and appeared to die, only to wake up when the rest of the family already took the pill and perished. And I did like this ending, involving questioning authority and not blindly following it. And I was also intrigued by the realization of who would be left on Earth, since the gas apparently isn't deadly. The homeless and illegal immigrants did not get a pill because, as far as documentation goes, they do not exist, so they did not get pills delivered to them. So now it may just be them left and whoever else maybe braved refusing the pill. But back to the character moments again. I did not like most people, nor did I latch on to really anybody. A lot of the conversations you would expect to be sometimes thought-provoking just did not land. They spent a whole several minutes discussing their scandals and their past sexual feelings and encounters with different members of the family years ago, and I don't know the reasoning for this being such a large focus, as it wasn't even funny, if that's what they were going for, nor did it develop any of the characters. It just felt like boring filler. And the ending with them all taking the pills had its small amounts of emotion, but without concern for these characters, I just didn't feel that emotion I should have for their quirks and their hard decisions they're making. They tried some humor with them, wanting to get up because they forgot to say goodbye to a certain family member. Or you had Matthew Good's character getting unsatisfactory ice and soda for the kids to take their pill with. All these moments could have brought on a variety of emotions, but I was just kind of waiting for it to end. No one truly struck a chord with me, so this just felt like an obligatory death montage for such a plot. And I think the one scene that got me just a little bit was when Art was running away from his parents, who were truly putting their foot down about him taking the pill, and he accidentally stumbles upon a car with a family with ages ranging from an infant to other small children to both parents, who passed away from taking the pill, and the scene appeared to traumatize him. Then you have Matthew Good, who puts on a good performance, crying. I guess at first seemingly for his son. He was crying for his son, for what he had to see, but then him realizing that he wasn't ready to die yet. That was actually probably the best scene in the whole movie. But that's really it. I know I've rambled long enough about 2021 Silent Night, so I'll just kind of leave it there. This movie has its following, and I do get it. It's mildly entertaining with a few nice touches to the story, but this will likely be the only time I see it. Next film. And lastly for today, back to our slasher Jack Frost. Some of the kills were interesting. The decapitation scene with the snowboard was goofy as shit, but it really fit the vibe. I like that one. It's a nice opener for the chaos waiting to ensue in the small town. And the only scene I really could have done without was the shower scene. I feel for a more lighthearted horror comedy with just some gore here and there, I don't think an implied sexual assault with a carrot was a choice that should have been made. And I do love dark humor, but something about it really bothered me in its inclusion. Say what you want about that, but it just felt really out of place to me. But I nearly laughed out loud when they discovered that antifreeze would badly damage Frost because the kid nearly killed his fucking dad. Because that morning, he put antifreeze in this abomination of a snack for his dad to take to work, and thank God he did not eat it because he put antifreeze in it to try and make sure that he stayed warm. Ah, Jesus, I just hope to God he taught him that that shit is not edible, even after literally drowning Jack Frost in it in their redneck contraption on the back of that truck. I would double tap that information to my son just in case. But I think that's mostly it besides what I said earlier. Unfortunately, there was just not that much that stood out to me to the point where I want to talk about anything else. So that's Jack Frost. Go watch it, then cleanse your palate with the kid-friendly one from 1998. Or just go watch another horror movie because a lot of us are a little more morbid inside and just can't stop. So anyway, that is my round of quick movie reviews for some Christmas horror films. Hopefully next week, I'll post another round of quick movie reviews. But it may be mostly Christmas films again, but I think I'll try and mix up horror and non-horror. Just because I like chaotic, jarring formats like that, so stay tuned. Follow me on TikTok for daily content. Maybe that platform will pull a miracle and survive, we'll see. But follow me on my other social media, and I'll see you next time on The Entertainment Room.